The leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Nemesio Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, was eliminated during a military raid. As soon as information about his death appeared in the media, retaliatory attacks by the cartel began in different regions. Gas stations and commercial establishments were set on fire. On strategic highways, fiery barricades made from seized trucks appeared. This tactic, known in Mexico as narco-bloqueos, has been used by cartels for a long time. It's a kind of demonstrative gesture, as if to say that the cartels still rule the country and that eliminating a leader won't give the government anything. In recent years, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has turned into a multi-level criminal corporation. The organization controls important supply channels for cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs, including fentanyl, which is sent to the U.S. market. The gang's activities extend beyond drug trafficking. Their interests also include extortion, human smuggling, illegal fuel trade, and involvement in illegal mining. In fact, we are talking about a financially stable system with a wide network of international connections. Experience from previous years shows that eliminating a single leader rarely means the destruction of the entire cartel structure. In the 2000s, when Felipe Calderón was in power, the government was already betting on using force to decapitate the cartels. The result was the fragmentation of large groups into smaller, often more aggressive organizations, which only increased chaos and violence in the streets. Later, President Andrés Obrador tried to shift the focus by promoting the policy of abrazos, no balazos, hugs, not bullets. The focus was on social programs and an attempt to address the root causes of crime. Nevertheless, pressure from the United States, which was interested in reducing drug trafficking, pushed Mexico to return to tougher methods. In early 1995, Donald Trump gave the green light to deploy American armed forces against Latin American drug cartels outside the United States. Mexico became the priority, where 6 of the largest criminal organizations operate, which Washington officially classified as terrorist groups. The Mexican authorities took a tough stance, categorically rejecting the very idea of the presence of American military forces on their territory. Despite this, the country has been in a state of large-scale and extremely bloody confrontation with the cartels for many years. Criminal groups have infiltrated all levels of society. The murder rate among politicians and government officials remains at a record high, and corruption has reached the highest echelons of power. At the same time, the United States ignore the problem of illegal export of their own weapons to Mexico. Cartels get these weapons through the same routes drugs travel from Mexico to the U.S. Trump regularly accuses the Mexican authorities that organized crime has excessive influence over the country's political elite and that Mexico risks ultimately transforming into a narco-state. This phrase may sound familiar because it was already said back in 1982. At that time in Colombia, the richest drug lord in history, Pablo Escobar, was seriously aiming for the presidency. But the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, proved that dirty money from drug sales had been invested in Escobar's election campaign and excluded him from Congress. Bonilla appealed to the conscience of Colombians, saying that we must not allow Colombia to become a narco-state. 2 months after his speech, Escobar's men shot the politician while riding motorcycles. Despite the tragic end, the minister was able to influence people's minds. Escobar was eventually caught, and Colombia did not become a narco-state. But what about Mexico? El Chapo. To hear the story of the legendary Mexican drug dealer whose story rivals that of Pablo Escobar. His name was Joaquin Guzman Loera, but his people called him El Chapo, the Shorty. After the death of Osama bin Laden, the U.S. authorities called him the most dangerous criminal in the world and public enemy #1. Since 2009, he was included in Forbes' list of the most powerful people on the planet, and his fortune was estimated at $1 billion. The Sinaloa cartel became the largest organization in the world for smuggling cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. El Chapo became especially famous for his prison escapes. The most recent one looked like a scene from the Shawshank Redemption, only without years of digging. His accomplices dug a tunnel from an abandoned house 1.5 kilometers away from Altiplano prison straight into his cell. The underground tunnel had lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle. In the cell, they found a hole 50 by 50 centimeters and a ladder leading down 10 meters. According to experts, this required removing more than 3,000 tons of soil and making about 380 truck trips. The work must have been carried out around the clock for several months. This was not his first escape. In January 2001, El Chapo disappeared from Mexico's most secure prison, Puente Grande. The investigation showed that he was taken out in a cart with dirty laundry, and the plan involved 71 staff members, including the warden. He could have just left through the main entrance. He owned the whole prison. Since 1993, Guzman lived there as if he were in a hotel. He ran the cartel by mobile phone, invited prostitutes, and held dinner parties with lobsters and steaks. He escaped only because the United States insisted on his extradition. In American courts, he was facing every conceivable charge. After his first escape, El Chapo started a war with his rivals for control over drug trafficking along the U.S. border. He acted ruthlessly and quickly increased his influence. To avoid getting caught again, the shorty had plastic surgery, grew a mustache, and changed his appearance. Police didn't know what he looked like for a long time and often arrested people who looked like him. Since 2001, Guzman had been hiding in the mountains of the western Sierra Madre. He changed his location every day, lived in one of 12 fortified houses, and moved around accompanied by hundreds of armed guards. Each house had a hidden camera system, and there were surveillance screens around the perimeter. But the main reason for his elusiveness was a network of underground tunnels. In the early 90s, architect Felipe de Jesus Corona Verber built secret vaults under the houses at his request, and later tunnels for escape in case of danger. Some of them stretched for more than a kilometer and had ventilation, electricity, drainage, and even rails for carts. Even the closest bodyguards were unaware of the tunnels. During police raids, Guzman would press a switch or plug something into an outlet. The bathtub would lift up, and an opening would appear underneath it. Later, he realized the tunnels could also be used for drug trafficking. The same architect designed an underground passage between the Mexican city of Agua Prieta and the American city of Douglas. This was a breakthrough. Most of the drugs in the U.S. started coming in underground. American drug enforcement officers uncovered no fewer than 90 tunnels belonging to the Sinaloa cartel. Then El Chapo's behavior changed. He married 18-year-old Emma Coronel, who demanded entertainment. Shorty lowered his security, spent more time in cities, and lived more openly. Before his visits to restaurants, his gunmen politely asked guests to hand over their phones, and after dinner, Guzman paid all the bills and returned the devices. He was guided by the saying, "It's better to live one bright year than 10 dull ones." That was exactly what became his fatal mistake. In 2012, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration tracked his smartphone. In February, he was nearly caught with a prostitute. Realizing he was being watched, Guzman gave his phone to a subordinate and disappeared. Later, he switched to a complex relay communication scheme through intermediaries: iPad, iMessage, and open Wi-Fi networks. It worked, but they still couldn't fully track him. Nevertheless, in February 2014, Guzman was caught in the resort city of Mazatlan. He became so convinced of his own elusiveness that he let his guard down. He was arrested without any shots fired. Mexican Marines, the American Drug Enforcement Administration, and the U.S. Marshals Service took part in the operation. The drug lord's location was revealed by two of his trusted subordinates who were arrested by the police. According to one version, they were subjected to torture. Before that, investigators gradually eliminated his inner circle, intercepted conversations, and tracked down couriers. The authorities offered a reward of $5 million for information about him. As mentioned earlier in this chapter, Shorty escaped from prison again. But after 2 years, El Chapo got caught again, and this time, apparently, for good. He was caught thanks to a romantic correspondence with 43-year-old Mexican actress Kate Ilio. Moreover, the shorty wanted a movie to be made about him, held meetings with actors and producers, and by doing this, helped the investigation track him down. Actor Sean Penn interviewed El Chapo for Rolling Stone magazine, which helped the authorities track down the drug lord. Guzman gave an interview to Penn because he wanted Hollywood to make a movie about his life. And then what every South American drug lord feared happened. The process of his extradition to the United States was started. After his arrest in Mexico, a war for control over the Sinaloa cartel began. And in February 2019, a jury in an American court returned a guilty verdict against Guzman. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, where he remains to this day. A specially trained service dog checks Shorty's prison food for poison. However, maybe you'll hear this name in the news again. Perhaps it's too soon to write off a master of prison escapes. The scale of crime. Now, let's return to the present day. After seeing the news from the States, President of Mexico Claudia Sheinbaum stated that there will be no U.S. military presence in the country, and there is no talk of an invasion. She also said that such proposals have been raised repeatedly during phone calls with Washington, but each time the Mexican side responded with an unconditional refusal. Sheinbaum became the first woman to hold the office of President of Mexico in the country's more than 200-year history. According to independent polls, the level of support for the government is quite high, about 80%. People like various social programs, such as expanding assistance to pensioners and low-income individuals, as well as increased funding for education. But this does not change the overwhelming opinion that the country is simply unsafe. According to the National Institute, about 60% of the country's residents do not feel safe in their daily lives. The state's war on drug trafficking has been going on for 20 years. It began in 2006, when President Felipe Calderón sent federal troops to Michoacán to suppress clashes between rival groups. But as time went on, the blood kept flowing, and it still does today. Since 2015, more than 300,000 people have died as a result of clashes among cartels and with law enforcement. At the same time, the number of military personnel involved in anti-crime operations keeps growing. It increased 2.5 times from 2007 to 2014, and today, an impressive 100,000 people are under arms. Despite this, the murder rate in the country remains extremely high. In 2024, there were more than 33,000 violent deaths recorded, averaging about 85 per day. The death rate is about 5 times higher than in the United States. Missing persons remain a separate tragic statistic. The National Search Commission reports that since 2010, more than 103,000 people are listed as missing in the country. More than 5,500 mass graves have been discovered in Mexico. In many cases, the bodies were burned or destroyed with chemicals, making identification impossible. As for the cartels, the number of fighters reaches 185,000 people, which is comparable to half the regular Army's personnel. At the same time, at least 200,000 firearms are smuggled illegally from the state into Mexico every year. Despite years of complaints from Mexico City, Washington doesn't seem very concerned about stopping this flow. In everyday life, politicians and officials are especially vulnerable, primarily at the regional level. The 2024 election campaign has become the most violent in the country. More than 200 people have fallen victim to contract killers, including registered candidates and those who were only planning to participate in the elections. Government officials are also under constant threat. For example, in the border city of Reynosa, Ernesto Vasquez, the special representative of the General Prosecutor's Office in the region, was killed. The attackers threw a grenade into the window of his SUV, then finished off the wounded man with point-blank shots. The murder was recorded on cell phones by eyewitnesses. He avoided publicity and played a key role in investigating large-scale diesel and gasoline theft schemes. The cartels were behind this. The stolen fuel was resold both within the country and illegally supplied to the United States. The scale is truly staggering. In the first 6 months of 2025, 86 current and former officials were killed in Mexico. The total number of victims reached 112 people, most of whom represented the Morena Party. In downtown Mexico City, in view of surveillance cameras, the personal secretary of the capital's mayor, Jimena Guzman, and her colleague Jose Munoz were shot dead. The president was informed about the double murder right during the morning press conference. The media described what happened as a blow to the very core of the ruling elite. Delivery, Mexican style. The reason for all this brutality and violence is money, or more precisely, cocaine, which is what brings in the money. The industrial production of cocaine is almost entirely concentrated in 3 countries: Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. It is in these regions that the combination of climate, altitude, and soil composition is most favorable for growing coca leaves. And most importantly, the largest consumer market, the United States, is located nearby. It is estimated that there are about 22 million people in the United States who regularly purchase cocaine. The European market is also significant, but there are 2 factors: the high cost of the substance due to intercontinental shipping expenses and competition from cheaper synthetic drugs. Today, up to 90% of all cocaine consumed in the United States passes through Mexico. The annual volume of the substance reaches 900 tons. Drugs are delivered to Central America by sea and air, either directly from Colombia and Peru or using transit points in Venezuela and Ecuador. The land route is all but ruled out due to the impassable swamps of the Darien region in Panama. Maritime transport is carried out using high-speed boats that are able to evade pursuit by the Coast Guard of the region's countries, which are often equipped with outdated vessels. On average, up to 600 kilos of drugs are loaded onto one such boat. Small fishing vessels are also widely used. In this case, cocaine is placed in special airtight containers that are towed underwater. If there is a risk of inspection, the cargo is simply detached and sinks. There is also the classic method of smuggling on ocean container ships. It's physically impossible to inspect the entire container flow. Only a small part of it is checked. The high level of corruption among port and customs officials also works in their favor. Drug traffickers' technical arsenal is always expanding. One of the most notable examples has been homemade submarines. Although they can't dive very deep and are relatively easy to spot from the air, their advantage is obvious. They allow up to 15 tons of drugs to be transported in a single trip and have significant autonomy. It only takes one refueling to travel from South America to Mexico. Air delivery is carried out using small, low-powered planes. Because of their small size, such aircraft cannot carry large shipments, but they are still used because aviation oversight is weak. For example, in Guatemala, there is only one radar station operating at the capital's airport. It controls only a third of the country's airspace. Also, the aircraft don't need much. The runways are simply compacted dirt strips located on land owned by drug traffickers. There are up to 800 such airstrips in Guatemala. Such planes are used especially often for transporting cocaine. Flights are carried out from as many as 7 Venezuelan provinces. The widespread scale of the drug business in a country whose presidency was stolen is easy to explain. Control over the key flows there is exercised by the Los Sols Cartel. It includes active and former officers of the Venezuelan armed forces. The leading role in this organization is attributed to Diosdado Cabello. This person is directly linked to the regime, which remains in power despite being decapitated.
Кстати, именно этим
They secured the loyalty of the top military leadership to President Nicolas Maduro. A change of power would almost inevitably mean criminal prosecution and prison terms for them. However, there have been no large-scale purges so far. Apparently, the regime hasn't really changed. After crossing Central America, drug shipments are sent to Mexico. The main route at this stage remains the Pacific route, which today plays a key role in supplying the American market with cocaine.
картели.
Mexican cartels are still commonly referred to with the prefix narco, although their activities have long gone beyond the trade of illegal substances. They have infiltrated food logistics, the fuel market, public transportation, and even resource extraction. According to the Institute for Economics and Peace, in 2024, the economic losses from crime amounted to the equivalent of 18% of GDP, and in some states, up to 35%. Converted per capita, the damage amounted to almost 34,000 pesos, or 148,000 rubles. Roughly speaking, that's the amount by which every Mexican can feel the economic impact of the drug cartels. Researchers point out that without the influence of organized crime, inflation could have been twice as low. Extortion is also thriving. Small and medium-sized businesses are forced to pay so-called protection fees to criminal groups every week, which are then included in the prices. Any attempts to eliminate them often end in violence. A telling case occurred in Veracruz, where a 62-year-old pensioner who worked part-time as a taxi driver was kidnapped for refusing to pay protection money. The criminals recorded a video with her, forcing her to publicly urge her colleagues to obey the mafia. A few days later, the woman was found murdered. Corruption is just as bad. In the Transparency International Index, Mexico ranks 140th. Recently, for example, former Minister of Public Security Genaro Garcia Luna was sentenced to prison for collaborating with the Sinaloa Cartel, the same cartel where El Chapo operated. Even agriculture is involved in criminal schemes. In Michoacán, a key avocado-producing region, a significant portion of new plantations was created through the illegal seizure of protected lands. Local residents were often forced off their land, sometimes violently. Buyers also point out the criminal aspect of this industry. Similar processes are observed in other sectors as well, from the chicken market to tortilla production, where prices are increasingly determined not by supply and demand, but by the pressure of criminal groups. Smuggling of mercury, which is used in illegal gold mining in South America, has become a separate source of income, causing severe damage to the environment and people's health. Despite efforts by Mexican authorities, organized crime remains strong, with no significant drop in violence or cartel influence. In this sense, Trump's harsh assessment is justified. This is the tense situation in Mexico at the moment. Trump won his first term largely thanks to his anti-immigration agenda and the construction of the wall specifically on the Mexican border. And besides, Mexico is right next door to the States, on the same continent, not some distant Greenland. So it's exactly here that the next international scandal could break out. That's all for today. Support our work on this video and see you in future videos on Cremola.